Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. Imagine dedicating your whole life to something, only to have it stolen from you in an instant. That's exactly what happened to Emily, a brilliant young woman who worked tirelessly to prove herself, only to be cast aside by her own family. But fate had other plans. A hidden letter, a shocking revelation, and a moment of truth would change everything. This is a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate redemption. Stay with us until the end, you won't believe how it all unfolds. Subscribe now to Life Stories and let's begin today's tale. I still remember the night my world changed. The memory is so sharp, so vivid, that even now, years later, I can still hear the clink of silverware against fine china, the low hum of conversation in the background, the way my father's voice cut through the air like a blade. I was 23, fresh out of business school, my degree still crisp in its leather folder. I had graduated top of my class, with professors praising my sharp instincts and dedication. But none of that mattered that evening. None of it could prepare me for what was about to happen. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. At least, that's what I thought. My parents had invited me to Harrison's Steakhouse, one of our family's flagship restaurants, the one my grandfather had opened decades ago. It was the heart of our family business. Harrison's Neighborhood Grill, a restaurant chain that had grown from a single diner into a name known across 3 states. I had worked there since I was 15, doing everything from washing dishes to managing shifts. This restaurant was my home, my life. I had spent years dreaming of the day I would officially join the company, work alongside my father, and eventually take over. But that night, as we sat around a beautifully set table, something felt off. My father, Richard, was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored suit, his posture rigid. My mother, Catherine, sipped her wine, her perfectly manicured nails tapping softly against the glass. And my sister, Lauren, sat across from me, wearing an expression I couldn't quite place, something between amusement and indifference. I didn't understand what was happening until my father set his knife and fork down, folded his hands together, and looked me straight in the eyes. "The business is going to your sister." I blinked. The words didn't make sense at first. My mind scrambled to process them, but they clashed against everything I had believed my future would be. I laughed, thinking it had to be a joke. "Very funny, Dad," I said, waiting for him to crack a smile. But he didn't. Next to him, my mother sighed and shook her head. "Emily, your father is serious." I looked to Lauren, hoping she would deny it. But instead, she smirked and tilted her head. "Dad thinks I have the right mindset for success," she said, flicking her hair over her shoulder. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "But I've worked in the restaurants for years," I stammered. "I know everything about how they run, from the kitchen to the finances. I have a business degree." "For God's sake, Lauren has never even worked a shift." My father didn't flinch. "That's enough, Emily." "No, it's not enough." My voice wavered. But I didn't care. "How can you give her the company when she's never even set foot in the back of a kitchen?" My mother set her wine glass down a little too forcefully. "Because she's a leader, Emily." She looked at me the way one might look at a child who just didn't understand the way the world worked. "She has the presence, the confidence. And you, well, you're just." She hesitated, then exchanged a look with my father. "Just what?" My heart pounded. "Too simple for this kind of responsibility," she finally said. A silence stretched over the table. The restaurant bustled around us, laughter and the clinking of glasses filling the air. But all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Lauren sighed dramatically, inspecting her manicured nails. "Let's be honest, Emily," she said. "You're the type who's happy serving tables. There's nothing wrong with that, someone has to do it." Her words sliced through me like ice. I turned to my grandfather, Grandpa Robert. The man who had always believed in me. The man who had taught me everything I knew about this business. He was the reason I fell in love with the restaurant world in the first place. But he said nothing. He simply sat there, quietly cutting his steak. His face unreadable. My father's voice broke through the suffocating silence. It's decided. Lauren will take over as CEO next month. He leaned back, satisfied, as if the matter was settled. You can stay as the floor manager at the downtown location, if you want. That was it. That was my grand future. A floor manager. I don't remember the rest of the dinner. I barely tasted the food on my plate. All I remember is the feeling like I had been tossed aside. Like all my years of effort meant nothing. That night, I cried myself to sleep in my small apartment, clutching my diploma in my hands. Everything I had worked for, every late night studying, every shift I had pulled at the restaurant, every dream I had ever had, it had all been thrown away. Because I didn't fit their idea of success. But I wouldn't let them break me. The next morning, I got up, wiped my tears, and went to work as if nothing had happened. My staff gave me pitying looks, they had all heard the news. Lauren pranced into the office, acting like she had already won, posting self-congratulatory messages about stepping into her leadership role on social media. I stayed quiet, swallowing my pride, waiting. Because deep down, I knew one thing. They had underestimated me. And one day, they would regret it. I settled into my new reality like a prisoner adjusting to a life sentence. Every morning, I put on my uniform, tied my apron, and walked into Harrison's downtown, the location I had been graciously allowed to manage. And every morning, the staff looked at me with a mix of pity and quiet anger. Emily, this isn't fair. Mark, my head chef, muttered one day as he chopped vegetables furiously. You should be running this company. Not, he stopped himself, glancing at the live stream playing on his phone. Lauren, dressed in an expensive blazer she had probably worn just for the cameras, was broadcasting live from a corporate leadership retreat. In reality, she was drinking overpriced cocktails at a luxury resort, surrounded by influencers, talking about vision and brand strategy while employees like Mark and I actually ran the restaurants. Yeah, I said dryly, wiping down the counter. I know. I wanted to fight back, to scream that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. But what could I do? My parents had made their decision. Lauren was in charge, no matter how little she knew about running a business. And it showed. In the first few months of her leadership, profits started slipping. Lauren ignored the warning signs, dismissing the concerns of seasoned managers. Supply costs skyrocketed because she insisted on deals with flashy, overpriced vendors instead of sticking with reliable suppliers. Customer complaints flooded in because she focused on trendy Instagram aesthetics instead of quality service. And worst of all, she alienated employees by treating them as disposable. I don't get why we need to keep these old-timers, she scoffed in one meeting, rolling her eyes at the reports about staff turnover. If they don't like the new direction, they can leave. We'll just hire more. They did leave. In droves. But my father stood by her no matter what. Every mistake, every loss, every warning from managers like me, it was all brushed aside. She's learning, he'd say, as if the company's struggles were just part of some grand coming-of-age story. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting, because I knew something that Lauren didn't. Restaurants are not built on branding. They are built on people, the cooks sweating over stoves, the servers memorizing regulars' favorite dishes, the managers who worked late into the night balancing budgets. You could post all the motivational quotes you wanted, but if you didn't take care of the people who made the business run, the whole thing would collapse. And collapse it did. Within 6 months, 3 of our most profitable locations were operating at a loss. Loyal customers stopped coming, choosing smaller, family-owned diners instead. Long-time employees quit, taking decades of experience with them. And still, my father refused to see it. Until I met Ethan. It was an ordinary afternoon when he walked into my restaurant, wearing jeans and a relaxed confidence that set him apart from the usual corporate types. He was just another customer looking for lunch until we started talking. He had asked me, casually, "What's the key to running a great restaurant?" I laughed, wiping my hands on a towel. "That's a big question. I've got time." And so, 4 hours. I told him. About everything, how restaurants weren't just about food but about experience. About loyalty. About the people behind the scenes. I told him how I had grown up in this business. How I had watched my grandfather build it from the ground up. How it was all slipping away under Lauren's so-called leadership. Ethan listened. Really listened. In a way that no one else had. He wasn't just polite or making small talk, he was interested. He asked the right questions. Nodded at the right moments. And when I talked about my frustrations, he didn't offer meaningless sympathy. Instead, he looked at me with a quiet admiration that made my heart race. "I think you're brilliant," he said simply. I didn't know what to say to that. No one had called me brilliant before. At least, not in a way that made me believe it. That day, Ethan didn't just walk out of my restaurant with a full stomach. He walked out with my number. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, I had something to look forward to. Ethan became the one bright spot in my life. We started seeing each other regularly, meeting after my shifts, sometimes at late-night diners, sometimes just walking through the quiet streets of town. He wasn't like the men I had known growing up. He wasn't interested in power for the sake of power. Didn't talk about winning in business like my father did. Instead, he asked me what made me happy, what I wanted. And, for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a future outside the shadow of my family's expectations. But my parents didn't see it that way. When Ethan and I announced our engagement, my mother barely looked up from her wine glass. "At least she found someone," she said with a sigh. "Maybe now she'll stop working altogether." Lauren laughed, shaking her head. "Not likely. Emily loves being a servant." Ethan's hand tightened around mine under the table. He didn't need to say anything. I could feel the quiet fury in his grip. The silent message of support. "They don't see your worth. But I do." I told myself I didn't care what they thought. I told myself I was happy. And I was until my grandfather, Grandpa Robert, passed away. His death was sudden. A heart attack in his sleep. It hit me harder than I ever expected. Not just because he was gone, but because it felt like the last piece of my childhood had been taken away. At the funeral, my father gave a somber speech about legacy, about honoring Grandpa's vision even though I knew he hadn't truly listened to a word of what Grandpa had taught me. Lauren looked bored, as if she was waiting for the reading of the will to see what she would get. But when the will was finally read, there was nothing. No division of assets. No instructions for the business. Just a statement that all of his holdings would be handled by his lawyers. Lauren wasn't concerned. "Obviously. Everything will go to Dad," she said, sipping champagne after the service. "I mean, it's only logical." I wasn't so sure. Grandpa had always been careful. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. He wouldn't have left things so open-ended. But I had no proof. No answers. And life, as it always does, moved on. Until my wedding day. I woke up that morning feeling lighter than I had in years. I wasn't just getting married, I was choosing my own path. I wasn't my father's daughter. Wasn't Lauren's overlooked sister. I was simply Emily. And I was about to start a new life with a man who saw me for who I really was. Then a courier arrived. He handed me an envelope made of thick, expensive paper. On the front, in handwriting I knew as well as my own, were the words, "To be delivered to Emily Harrison on her wedding day." My hands shook as I opened it. The moment my eyes landed on the first line, the rest of the world disappeared. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then 2 things have happened. I am no longer here. And today, you are marrying the man you love. I wish more than anything that I could be there to walk you down the aisle, to see you in your beautiful dress, and to tell you in person how proud I am of you. But since I can't, I hope this letter will be my final gift to you. Tears blurred my vision as I kept reading. I have watched you be underestimated your entire life. Your parents and sister never saw your true worth. They mistook your kindness for weakness, your attention to detail for simplicity, your hard work for servitude. But I saw something completely different. I saw myself in you. The same fire, the same determination, the same understanding of what makes a business truly successful. It's not about power. It's not about money. It's about people. I swallowed hard, gripping the letter tighter. My heart was pounding, as if it already knew what was coming. What your parents and sister don't know, Emily, is that they never truly had control over Harrison's neighborhood grill. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the words again, convinced I had read them wrong. I never transferred ownership to your father. He thought he owned everything. He thought he was in charge. But in reality, he was only ever managing the operations. I was still the true owner. I controlled everything through a holding company called Bear Creek Holdings. Bear Creek Holdings. I had seen that name before. On paperwork. In legal documents. In tiny mentions over the years that I had never thought much about. My hands trembled as I read the next line. As of today, Bear Creek Holdings is yours. Emily. You are now the majority owner of Harrison's Neighborhood Grill. A gasp escaped my lips. I could hardly breathe. The lawyers have already finalized the paperwork. As of today, your father, mother, and sister are no longer in charge. They were never truly owners. They were employees. And now, they work for you. I had to sit down. My wedding dress rustled around me as I lowered myself onto a chair. My heart beat loud in my ears. There was more. I never wanted to see them crush your spirit. But I needed to be sure you were ready. I needed you to understand every part of the business, from washing dishes to running a full restaurant. I needed you to learn humility, to work harder than anyone else, to prove to yourself, not to them, that you deserve this. Now it's time to show them what true leadership looks like. And remember, sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising above. I pressed the letter to my chest, letting the words sink in. Then my phone buzzed. An email from Grandpa's lawyers. My fingers shook as I opened it. It was all real. The official documents confirming my ownership. The meeting agenda for Friday morning's emergency board meeting. And, most shocking of all, evidence of Lauren's mismanagement over the past months. A loud knock on the door made me jump. Emily. It was Ethan. Something's going on outside. Your family is making a scene. From inside the bridal suite, I could hear raised voices coming from the garden, the very place where my wedding ceremony was supposed to happen. My family was arguing. Their voices sharp, urgent. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and reached for the door handle. No more feeling small. No more doubting myself. It was time to take what was mine. As I stood at the head of the boardroom, looking into the faces of the people who once dismissed me, I felt a calm I had never known before. My father, silent and tense. Lauren, pale with disbelief. The board members, waiting, with steady hands. I laid out my vision, one built on respect, integrity, and the true values my grandfather had taught me. No shortcuts. No empty branding, just hard work and a commitment to the people who made this company great. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear, Harrison's Neighborhood Grill was mine. Months later, as I worked a quiet dinner shift in my grandfather's first diner, the door opened. My parents walked in, hesitant but humbled. They had come, not as owners, but as customers. I greeted them with a steady voice. Welcome to Harrison's. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving them wrong. Subscribe to Life Stories for more.